Today on Bridges, we'll be talking about addiction and recovery. Welcome to Bridges. I'm Monica Schmelter, and I am so glad that you could join us today. Today we're going to be talking about addiction and recovery, and it might surprise you, and I'm sure would sadden you to know that amongst people the ages of 17 to 29, that the leading cause of death in that age group is overdose. So with that in mind, I thought we should open up the conversation and talk with someone who's lived the life of addiction and is also now living in recovery. And Chad Crowe, I'm so glad to have you here today.
Thank you. So excited to be here today.
You know, if you would start us out, I know that you're working now as a counselor in a ministry treatment program. That wasn't always your story, but tell us a little bit about what you do right now.
I'm a staff member at a 12-month discipleship program for men and women in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. It's actually where I actually found Christ at and gave my heart and life to Him. And through the process, graduated, and now I just try to help men and women that struggled in the same areas that I struggled in, you know, to let them know that there's hope, to let them know that no matter what they've been through in their life, no matter what situation they're up against, that Jesus Christ is the answer, you know, and through His love, make a way.
And it's so good that you can do that and you can work in that area. And I'm sure for the men and the women that you work with, it's helpful for them to know that you've also struggled in that same area. So I'd like for us to take just a moment to talk about your life before Christ and how it is that you ended up getting involved in drugs anyway.
Being raised in church, my father was a pastor.
A pastor's kid?
Yes, ma'am. And my grandfather was a pastor. I grew up in church and always knew what God's love was. Always knew what God could do in my life. You know, at an early age, about 9 years old, my parents got divorced. And I think that right there was the ticket that the enemy tried to use to try to begin to destroy my life. You know, at 13, my brother had moved out of my home, and it was just me. So I was really searching to fill that void in my life. I was searching for love in all the wrong places. We moved and changed cities, and I went to a different school, new people, and I was all alone. You know, I played sports, but I began to experience drugs and alcohol and things of that nature. And before you know it, I was on my road, a road to destruction. And
one of the things I read, Chad, that you wrote about was that, you know, as you were kind of dabbling and getting started in drugs and all of that, you know, kind of initially people use drugs sometimes to medicate. They kind of get that numb, that, you know, that kind of buzzed feeling, but you really don't see the other side of it when you get started.
Yes, ma'am. You know, it's you're going out to get high, and you really don't even realize what you're doing, you know, and before you know it, it grabs a hold of you, and you begin to separate yourself. You begin to put yourself in a place in life where you're always searching for something more, you know, and the whole time, and as, you know, being raised in church, you know, the enemy's using that as a pinpoint to pull you away from His promises, for God's promises for your life, you know, and before you, it seems like when I was 15 years old, I was already, you know, I was in juvenile. I'd already got in trouble. I played baseball growing up my whole entire life and was pretty good at baseball. And I love playing sports. My parents did all they possibly could to try to help me and to try to lead me in the right direction. I was still going to church. I was still a part of my youth group at church. And
while you were using drugs?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and were your parents aware that you were using drugs? Because you mentioned they were trying to help you.
Yes, ma'am. Well, you know, I think they had started to see the signs of it, you know. They started to see the separation. They started to see the distancing that I would do with them, and the different kind of people that I was hanging out with, you know. And by the age of 17 years old, I was on my way to prison. And I think at that point in my life, my parents would never imagine that I was going to get to the place in my life where I'd end up, you know, on my way to prison.
Yeah. And, you know, most people, pastors or not, you know, as a parent, that's never what you want for your child. And we don't ever imagine that that could happen. And yet, so many of us don't really realize is that what it takes is a few really bad decisions and prison.
Yeah.
So you were so young.
Yes, ma'am.
What was prison like at such a young age?
Well, going in, I was like a baby, you know.
Yeah.
At 18 years old, I was going through classification, and I was in a whole different world.
What does that mean, classification?
Classification is something that you go through. They classify you and where they're going to send you to.
Okay.
And it was very terrifying. You know, I was up against a whole different world, and I had joined a gang inside of the prison walls just for protection. You know, and before you know it, that I was so influenced in that gang that I had allowed that to be something that I stood on, something that I had walked in. You know, and the whole time that I was a part of that, I seen things that happened that I would never imagine that would happen in my life. And I look back at it now, and I was like, God, you were so merciful on my life. You were so, your grace was so sufficient for me, because you allowed me to go through all these different things in my life, to go against all these different battles that I went through, to finally come to the end. I can now walk in victory in what Christ has done for me, you know?
And you know, that is so important, and that's why I wanted to have you here today to talk about this, because so many people, Chad, are facing the same or similar circumstances as you. You know, you really describe a home. You came from a pastor's home. Your grandfather was a pastor. We're talking about people that love the Lord.
Amen.
And yet we know that even as Christians, none of us are perfect. None of us have perfect homes. And so the breakup of your parents' marriage served as obviously something very hurtful, moving around, all these changing things. And I'm sure that families, parents, teens that are watching today are like, you know, some of those same things have happened. And so I've taken all these wrong steps. And I just can't imagine that you would end up in prison and joining a gang. And yet you're here today to say that even though all of that happened and is true, you didn't stay there.
No, ma'am.
How long were you in prison?
I was in prison for 10 years. I had got a 10-year sentence. I went from Georgia to Tennessee, and in this time period, from prison to prison, my parents had to watch me grow from visitation. You know, and it's so many times that I look back at it now, because I don't like to look back at it in a perspective to give it any glory.
Exactly.
I like to look at it in a way that I know that there's men and women out there that's went through divorce, that's went through addiction, that's went through things of this world, and it's been the root problem of a situation, and they think they can't get out of it.
Right.
You know?
Right.
But the whole time, that what they need to really finally realize is that God's with them right there in that season of their life. You know,
even in prison.
Even in prison, God's there. He's merciful.
Yeah.
You know. His plans are so much greater than our plans could ever be.
So when you got out of prison, like, did that like get you clean and sobered up? Was that your turning point?
I got out in 2009. It was in December of 2009. My parents come and got me, and I really secluded myself for a long time. I really thought there was no hope for myself, because, you know, you're a felon, you've been to prison, it's hard to get a job, it's hard to do this, it's hard to do that. And then I met my kid's mother, and where I have two beautiful children now. And I believe that I used that when I had my kids, it really took a different toll on my life. You know, drugs and alcohol wasn't something that I was accustomed to doing anymore. I didn't even have no thoughts of that. You know, I really wasn't active in church or anything. I wasn't, you know, I still hadn't accepted Christ yet. I think the point in my life where I actually got to the end of myself is when me and my kids' parents separated, and I went back to drugs to try to fill that void in my life. You know.
So you had a relapse.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the wonderful thing for you is that you meet your kid's mom, you have kids, and they kind of give you this bright spot, something to live up to. But then you're saying when that relationship broke up, you relapsed and went back to drugs. Is that what happened?
Yes, ma'am. And the stint of drugs now was way more than it ever could be before, because before that, you know, drugs wasn't what they was now.
Right.
You know, I started experiencing, I started using methamphetamine, and it just literally took the life out of me. You know, separation and setting myself in a whole different world then, you know,
Yeah.
because people that's on that drugs and alcohol, I mean, you separate yourself from, you know, everything that's around you, that's life.
Yeah, because I read some of the things that you wrote about it, and I've talked with many people on the set and in my family that have struggled with addiction and drugs. And basically, what I hear people say over and over, you don't want to let yourself be around anybody that's going to shine a light on anything because you already feel bad enough.
Amen.
And you feel like you're trapped and you can't get out. And yet, you did. God was merciful to let you hit rock bottom.
Amen.
Tell us about that and how you came to Christ.
What had happened is that I had overdosed on drugs several times, and I had got to the very end of myself. I was actually on probation, and I had violated my probation, and I had ended up going to jail, and I had came home, and here's what really done was the end of it for me, really, I think, is that when I had got locked back up for a violation, I actually went into the cell, and they were having a Bible study in my cell. And it was just like a divine encounter with God, because even though that I was in jail, even though that, you know, people say jailhouse religion and things of that nature, but God wants to use every situation, you know, to try to bring you to the end of yourself.
Absolutely.
And I had gotten this book, and I was reading this book about Destined to Reign. It was Joseph Prince's book at the time, and I loved that book because I actually got to find myself in a place where no matter what I had went through in my life, no matter what I had done in my life, you know, God's grace was sufficient, and what He did at the cross was enough to pay the price, you know. And I had heard of a program called Life Changers Outreach, and I had got the ticket of it to Life Changers Outreach, and I had used my last little phone card to call to do my phone interview. And then when the lady, Miss Ashley, had answered the phone after me calling numerous and numerous of times, I finally got accepted, you know. And I actually got out of jail and went to the program. And going up there to that program, it really showed me something about myself, that I was so far away from where I was supposed to be at, you know. And it pointed me to Christ. It pointed me to the cross. It pointed me to the place in my life where I actually did accept Christ, you know. And my life was literally totally changed because I cried out for help, you know. I said, God, I need you right now, you know. And He has totally transformed my life.
And we want to hear all about that. We've got to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to hear all about Chad and the transformation in his life and what he's doing now to reach out to others who are also struggling with addiction.
Don't miss another episode of Bridges. Subscribe to our YouTube channel today, where you can find all of Monica's latest teachings and interviews. It's easy to do. Just visit youtube.com, search Monica Schmelter, and click subscribe. Once you are subscribed, click the bell icon to get notified when a new episode is available to view. Thanks for watching Bridges.
For more information on a guest, visit our website, ctntv.org.
Today on Bridges, we are talking about addiction and recovery. My guest is Chad Crowe, and he's sharing his own story of addiction and his recovery, which all started when he met Jesus Christ as his Savior. So we know, Chad, that now you're working on staff at Life Changers. Is it international?
Yes, ma'am.
And that you're helping others who struggle with addiction. But for you at one point, addiction really was that dark hole until you hit what you call rock bottom and found Christ. When you were at rock bottom, would you have ever imagined that your life can be what it is now?
No, ma'am. Not at all. Not at all. I never could see the end of the tunnel, you know. I kept on going deeper and deeper. And when I felt like there was a little bit of hope, the least little thing would happen, and I'd go right back in, you know.
Yeah.
And
you know, Chad, you sent some things in here, and I won't read all of them, but I thought maybe to read a few of them, only because when I read some of the things you wrote, it allowed me to understand in a better way kind of the road of somebody struggling with addiction. Because, you know, when you talk about, well, you know, I almost overdosed several times, the first thing somebody that doesn't struggle with that wants to say, well, when you almost overdosed, why did you go back?
yes, ma'am.
But why do you go back?
Because you're steady searching to fill that void, you know. 95% of the people that's in addiction, there's a root to the problem.
Yeah.
And You know, families don't, you go back because you're searching for love. You can't
And it's
get
like a compulsion, right?
It
It's
is.
not like just as easy as saying, oh, I'm going to go to the store.
That's right.
Because sometimes you wanted to stop, but you felt like you couldn't.
You couldn't because you were so far in.
Yeah. So I wanted to read to those of you who are watching. You might have a family member or somebody that struggles with addiction, and you might be completely angry with them. And I understand all of that. But what I wanted us to do was to kind of shine the light on what goes on in the heart and in the mind of somebody struggling with addiction, so that maybe we could tear down those walls and better reach out to those that we love. For example, one of the things that Chad wrote in was, you know, of course, being raised in church and with his father and this divorce that led him the wrong way. He also talks about being addicted is like lying all the time, and then when you tell the truth, that nobody will still believe you. And I thought about how painful and how isolating that would be if you're trying to make good changes and nobody will believe you. And he talks about just wanting to do anything for his children, like just do anything, but yet you can't get clean for your kids. And Chad, what I saw in here was so much hopelessness that went on in your heart and mind. And is that fairly true for most people that struggle with being
Yes.
addicted?
Yes, ma'am. I think it's true with everyone. You know, I think in addiction, you get yourself in a place in your life where you burn every single bridge that there possibly is. You know, with your family, your friends, your loved ones. Your family almost pulls your children away to protect your children. You know, and then when you actually do get in a place where you're actually having to speak to your parents or speak to your family about something, and you know, they're saying this and you're saying that, and there's no trust there.
Yeah.
You know, there's no trust, and families really just get to the end of it and they're just done.
Yeah.
Hurt.
And exactly, like families are hurt, so they don't know what else to do. The person that's struggling with addiction is hurt and they don't know what to do. And that's why I wanted us to do this program. It's like we need to find ways to come together and to help one another. And you said something, Chad, you said that without meaning to, that sometimes we put our foot on the back of somebody struggling with addiction.
Yes, ma'am. The whole time, you know, we'll hold them down. You know, we'll condemn them. We'll rebuke them, and we're not doing these things with love.
Yeah.
You know, the biggest problem in addiction these days is that the family members and the parents and the loved ones are enabling the addict. You know, and that's really
Like with money?
With money, with places to live, with paying their expenses for them. You know, instead of getting them in a place in their life where they can actually start receiving the help that they need.
Tell me some, and I want to focus on how the Lord really helped you too, but what are some helpful things that a mom or a dad or both that are watching right now, what's something that would actually be helpful rather than enable?
Well, you know, you would have to, you know, if you're enabling, you know, a loved one, or you know, if you're paying their cell phone bill, you know, if they're on your plan, take their phones and stuff away, you know, but do it in a way where you're loving them, you know. Don't separate yourself with them just because they're using or they're addicted to something. If you recognize the problem, then you just really have to find your way with Christ and say, God, I need you to give me the strength to be able to get through this, and just love them at their weakest, you know. And that's what God does with us, you know. No matter what the situation is in our life, Jesus Christ loves us. God loves us, no matter what we do in our life, you know. And we have to love each other. That's where that agape love is released.
Absolutely, and it's unconditional.
It is.
And it is okay to love someone that's struggling with addiction.
It's perfectly okay.
It's not helpful to give them money, put them on our cell phone plan, pay their bills, but
Love.
is something that we can do. And I want us to, because I know that you talked about, you know, even though you're on staff now at a treatment center and helping people, you went through the program yourself.
Yes, ma'am.
And, you know, I've met people and I know that they're very well intended and they're like, well, I'm just going to pray and the person's going to be instantly delivered. And I know that God can do that. Most of the time, though, Chad, that's not the way it works. And I would like for you to address that and like what you went through to go from a person that was relapsing, went to prison and jail and doing drugs, to a man that now is loving the Lord, glorifying the Lord, and helping others. What does that look like?
Well, you know, I went from rap music, the things that I was listening to, the things that I was taking in. And then when I actually went to the program, I turned myself, no TV, no nothing, was in class every single day, learning different character qualities and things. Our minds are so carnal.
Yes, they
that
are.
we're so far away where we was truly created to be, and through Life Changers where I was at, it was just like every little thing that I did, it pointed me to the cross. It pointed me to the place in my life where I actually knew what love was, what joy was, what was peace and long suffering, the fruits of the Spirit, and the character qualities of Christ. And we're like a computer.
Yep.
What you put in is what you're going to get out. And it goes through just the fire. You got to go through the fire, the purging process. God's going to purge those things. And that's what I went through.
And was it hard for you to go through that 18 months?
Yes, ma'am, it really was, because it seemed like that every time it turned around, I was doing something that I wasn't supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
There was a lot of reproof and correction, but it was in that reproof and correction that something was being instilled in me that was going to keep me grounded, in truth, that was going to keep me grounded in, in the Word, and that's what it took. It really took the Word. It took
Yes.
reading of the Word and my prayer time and devotion with Christ to know that I am a child of God, that no weapon formed against me shall prosper,
Right.
and everything that I do, I give God all the glory for it, and, men and women don't know that.
No. And, you're talking about the Word, and you're talking about you had a community of people around you who loved you that might have to say, no, you can't do that here. This is not okay. It's like relearning your character. It's relearning everything, having everything that was a part of your life stripped away so that you could become the man that you are. What if a person has a family member and they don't want help?
Yeah.
Because I know that happens. But
it does
what
happen.
I know we can't make somebody want help, but are there some things that we can do to help point them in that direction?
Yeah, you can. The best thing is to love that person through that, and point them in a righteous direction, without being too persistent, I guess you could say, because a lot of times we get over persistent with things and we offend them. Offense is very big in a
Yes,
family,
it is.
because as soon as you tell them they're not doing something right, they get offended with you, and then before you know it, they run from that, and then they're right back in that addiction again.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that I read, that you wrote. What I could see clearly from what you wrote is that you really felt separated from people. You felt alone, and I can imagine in that state of mind, if I come to you and say, no, Chad, here's exactly what you need to do. So there, we do need to be honest with people, and I know that, and we need to stand on the Word, but you're saying, like, don't beat them over the head every 5 seconds with...
You just can't. They're already in a place in their life where they're hurt.
Yeah.
We can't hurt them anymore.
Amen.
They're already at their bottom. So no matter what they're doing, no matter where they're at, just love them, but stop enabling them. And love them through the stopping of an enabling. Love them through whatever you're doing to keep.
Yes. So like if you got to take away the cell phone,
Still love
continue
them.
to be kind to them, continue to do things with them, that sort of thing. Just don't pay their bills and do all that stuff.
It's like the more you show God's love to them through whatever they're going through in their life, and you're going to separate. They're going to begin to see, oh, Mom's not doing this to me no more, but she's still loving me through it. I don't understand. There's something that's different. It's attractive. I look at it now, and as I walk into the world now, and I walk the streets, and I go to the mall, or I'll go to the grocery store or something, it's amazing that how God shows you people that's in addiction.
Yeah.
And you're like, look where God's brought me from.
Absolutely. We've got just a few seconds left, but I would love for you to paint a picture of what your life looks like now that you're on the other side of addiction.
I'm married now. I have
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I have a beautiful wife. Her name's Tiffany. She's actually a staff member where I work at too on the women's side, and I met her there. And but I have my children back. I have 2 beautiful kids, Kinsley and Traven, and then I have a third child. His name's Aaron, and God's still restoring that relationship with him. But my other two children, God's fully restored that with my family, my parents, and it's like none of this has ever happened, you know. And it's like my parents, they look at it now as like answered prayer.
Oh, how wonderful for all of you. Thank you for coming and for
Yes,
sharing
ma'am.
your story.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Stay tuned. Monica will be right back with closing comments.
Welcome to Bridges. I'm Monica Schmelter. I'm glad that you could join us today.
All of these different people united on the same team, praying for each other, blessing each other.
And it was that hope and that faith is why I survived.
When my dad was preaching for a youth revival, and I don't know what happened, still I can't believe it. I was the first person who stood up and walked down the aisle.
He gave me my first Bible, and he opened a window in my life to Christian faith through Jesus Christ.
When you want the Lord to speak to you, it's like you don't know what He's going to tell you.
If we'll be just that one that could step up in faith to say, God, I just trust that you have better than this.
No one else can tell you what you need except God, because He loves us. We're His children.
Do you have a ministry or business? You can contact Nashville's WHTN for studio and programming rates. Visit ctntv.org/studio or call 615-754-0039 for more details.
Today on Bridges, we talked about addiction and recovery, and certainly addiction and recovery touches most individuals and families in America in some way. Most of us know someone, if we're not related to someone, that is dealing with or battling addiction. And as we talked about today, what is really important for us as believers in Christ, if we know someone that's struggling or they're our family member or our child, is to pray for them, to show them the unconditional love of Christ. And then the next thing might be a little bit more challenging for us, depending on our personalities, but that is to stop enabling. You know, Chad mentioned even in his story today that if you're paying somebody's bills while they're struggling with addiction or got their cell phone on your plan, that those kinds of things are enabling, and they can really stop someone from bottoming out or from getting to that place where they are ready for help. So God always does His part in the supernatural. And what's up to us is to do our part in the natural, to take the steps that we need to take, which may be to have that honest conversation with the person and ask them, would you be willing to get help? To be able to pray for the person, to love them right where they are, just like we all need love right where we are. We're all struggling with something. Might not be addiction, but we're all struggling in the flesh. But God loves us right where we are and helps us all the way through, so we can do that for one another also. We're out of time today. We've got to go, but we say goodbye, and God bless you.